Thailand called the floating football pitch. I believe most of you are quite familiar with this clip and film. It was very touching, and I am now standing very close to this film, and I'm gonna explore such a floating football pitch on behalf of all of our viewers. And I'm gonna take you to interview such a football team on this pitch and their stories. First of all, you could look at the houses behind me. Yesterday, I just arrived in Panyee Island. And when I was sailing towards this island, I noticed that there was no flat land on this island. All of the houses of the residents have been built actually on those wood columns in the water. You couldn't imagine that people could have access to football on such a land with no flat land. That's why the local residents have been going all out to build such a floating football pitch. On the right, that is the football pitch the villagers have built floating on this ocean. They are now enjoying one of the games, and locally the residents are quite enthusiastic about football, and every day at this time they would have some training sessions, and those 6 members playing football are members of the local football team. Some background information about this football team. Because of the local residents' enthusiasm towards football, in particular those young kids, they have tried every deed to build such a football team. And that is the reason why the Panyee football team came into being. And of course, they share a lot of touching stories. We could see that the football team is 32 meters and 16 meters in length and width. It's a small-sized pitch for football games, and all of the 6 players are having a 3 versus 3 game. If we zoom in closer, we could observe that those kids are not wearing any particular suits or shoes, sports shoes for this game. And also you could see that this pitch is floating on the ocean together along with the waves, so it's more difficult than the usual games over land, and that has higher requirements of the players' body strength. And also there is no railings or other protective measures around this pitch. For example, if you kick this ball into the water, then the kids have to jump into the water to fetch it back. So on such a floating pitch, there needs to be some rules. Whoever kicks this ball into the water has to be responsible for jumping into the water and get it back. That has high requirements of the players controlling of this ball. All of the players must train themselves in such a controlling capacity. In particular, when they're passing the ball or controlling the ball, they have to be quite cautious. Otherwise, they have to dive into the water to get the ball back. That's exactly why they're not wearing shoes, because at any time they might have to jump into the water, and if they're wearing their shoes, they might wet their shoes. Those players we're seeing are the current players in this team, but actually this football team was already in place 20 years ago, and today we have an interviewee. His name is Mr. Bass. He's one of the founders of the Panyee Football Club. Hello, Mr. Bass. And he's gonna receive our interview in the local language, and I'm gonna translate for him. First of all, could you please introduce to us about these several players?
Okay. 刚才班一先生他介绍呢，就是现在正在进行训练，因为他们在下个月呢将会有一场比赛，
According to Mr. Bass, they're having a training because next month they're gonna have a game. That's why they take frequent trainings these days. And interestingly, you could see the balls fall frequently into the water, and sometimes accidentally they may fall together with the balls. Now let's move closer to this pitch. According to Mr. Bass, the first floating football pitch ever seen in this village was initiated by Mr. Bass about 3 decades ago. There was a makeshift football pitch 3 decades ago, and this pitch we are looking at have been renovated based on the original one. Now this floating pitch has already been renovated for 7 times. In the early days, the original pitch was made from those woods they get locally, and after generations of renovation, they have further extended the size of the football pitch. And this pitch available has been used for several years and is waiting for more rounds of renovation.
OK， 我们看到这个球场确实有些损坏啊，底下其实我们看到细节是个木桩，它上面也会有一些铁钉。我刚才就有了解到，就是说它这些队员都是适合。
And we could observe some damage on this pitch, and you could see some of the screws in the woods. And according to the information I received, since all of the kids are playing barefoot on this pitch, I wonder if they could get hurt by those screws in the woods. And according to Mr. Bass, these things did happen. That's why they need more restoration and renovation. And I found out such a detail. There is a hammer on the pitch. So whenever they find something wrong with the screws, they would use this hammer to knock it in to avoid any more damage or harm dealt to those players. For example, the screw is falling out and they have to hammer it in. They could just instantly pick this hammer up and deal with the situation. While I am standing on this floating pitch, I could feel the waves underneath this pitch. Whenever a wave is flashing towards this side, I could feel the ups and downs of this pitch. And during such floating, those screws are prone to expose themselves and get out of the woods. So it's quite dangerous. Mr. Bass was just now saying that it costs a lot to maintain such a pitch, and this village has given a lot of support. Basically, the local villagers would source some money to restore and improve and maintain this pitch. We could see the ball is in the water again. Mr. Bass just now said, while they were designing the surroundings, they had never thought about building some railings because they just want to train their children to be very careful when they are passing the balls. Otherwise, they're going to fall all together with the ball. They not only need to train their capacity of controlling the balls, they also need to be good swimmers. For such a small island, all of the kids usually are good swimmers because they live in the coastal area. Now let's see if we could find a boy for more information.
昨天也采访过这个球员，他是29岁，今年叫做 Not， 小名太小名叫 Not， 也是我们巴斯先生的大儿子。OK，
Yesterday, I have already interviewed this player. He is 29 years old, and his name is Not. He's also the biggest son of Mr. Bass. Good afternoon.
水面上踢球和在陆地上踢球有些什么样的不同，有些什么样的困难？
I was just now asking the question, when we are playing on this floating pitch, what is the difference from the usual football games on the land?
OK， 刚才他也给我们介绍到，确实在这个浮动的球场上踢球要比在陆地上踢球更加困难一点。但是同时呢，也是对他们的整个身体的协调能力，包括这个对球的控球能力。
He briefed me that it was truly more difficult playing on this floating pitch than the usual football games, but they need to pretty well balance their body and control the balls. That was quite an obstacle and also quite an opportunity to train themselves, and they really value such an opportunity to train themselves on this pitch. In that way, time after time, they would find it easier. And you could see that the size is not very big. I'm going to ask him further questions about the size.
刚才 Not 他也是介绍到啊，就是说他们练习场的这个球门非常的小，一旦他们在这进行完训练之后，再进行到标准场进行训练的时候，他们就会觉得整个。
Not just now introduced that in this training pitch, the ball is also very small. So after certain training, and they transitioned to the usual size of a pitch, they would find it more easier to kick the ball because the goal is bigger, the ball is bigger, and the pitch is bigger. So such a training would offer him a better advantage during the usual games. Now let's keep enjoying the games. Just now, we mentioned that the football pitch has 30 years of history. That was quite a good job done to this pitch. Now, I have more questions about this football club to Mr. Bass. Mr. Bass said that 3 decades ago, when they first engaged with this sports called football, they fell in love with football and they decided to build such a football team. In the beginning, they have about 15 to 20 players in their football club, but now the size of this club is much bigger than before. And Mr. Bass is not playing anymore, but he put in place such a football club, and after achieving something in his own football career, he keeps operating this football club so that more young kids and children could have access to football. That's why he keeps his job in this football club, and also in southern Thailand, he is holding some of the games. Now let's look at those houses. We could see that those small boats are the major transportation means for the villagers. Because there is no flat land in this village, they have to rely on such a transportation means. And also the houses are built upon those timber piles. That's why this village is called a floating village. And as I said, ships are major transportation means. And all of the roads in the village are actually exposed out of the water surface. Under that circumstance, it is truly difficult for them to have such a sports venue, let alone a football pitch, which requires a large land area.
OK， 我们现在要进的这个建筑呢，是他们的一个木亭子。据我之前的了解呢，最早刚才给大家介绍了最早的时候的这个浮动的球场，全都是用木块。
We are now entering one of their pavilions built of wood. As I mentioned in the beginning, the original pitch was made up of those wood blocks. So after several times of restoration, we could still see the remaining wood blocks. Those wood blocks are now supporting such a pavilion. And if we look at the football pitch from this angle, it looks like this. And also we could see the beautiful surroundings offshore. That's why many people call this pitch one of the most beautiful football pitch in the world. As I said, this pitch is located in southern Thailand in a bay called Panyee Bay. There are many sightseeing sites in this area. For example, there are many beautiful islands like James Bond Island. And also we have some beautiful tourist spots like Krabi. And we could see that there are some mountains in the far. Now, Mr. Bass, could you please tell us why this pitch is called one of the most beautiful pitches in the world? Mr. Bass was pointing at one direction. That was a very well-known tourist spot, and I've done my homework. This set of mountains are in the shape of a sleeping baby, and that mountain over there, it looks quite like a whale rising up from the water. That's why the local villagers call this mountain the Whale Mountain. Many visitors who have paid visit to southern Thailand might know of such an island called James Bond Island. It's right in our camera. So in the future, if any viewer is interested in coming and visiting this place, you could choose to board our Phang Nga Island to look at those surroundings. While we are sitting in the pavilion, I would want to get more information. I heard that this village is home to about 1,600 villagers with about 380 households, and all of those villagers are usually quite keen on football matches. And also, there is a school here in the village, but no student is right now taking classes, and there are many young kids playing football right now. So, Mr. Bass, I have a further question. He said that in this village it has 200 years of history. And in the early days, the villagers came from Malaysia and Indonesia. That's why I observed that this village is quite a Muslim village.
在进行渔业的活动。但是近年来呢，由于这个浮动的足球场被大家所
This village used to be a fishing village. Almost 100% of the villagers are fishermen. But then, because of the existence of the football pitch, this village has become quite a sensation in the world. So they're receiving more tourists and visitors. Now, the local villagers have about 50% of them working in the tourism industry. For example, they may ride the boat for the visitors. They may be the peddlers selling things to the tourists. I was now asking Mr. Bass why the idea of building such a floating football pitch came into him. He said that the village has many limitations, but the local people are still quite crazy about football, and they really long for their own football venue and field. That's why such an idea struck him, and step by step this football field was expanded to such a size, and it was welcomed by so many football players, and he's quite relieved. Today Mr. Bass took a lot of photos to introduce to us more about such a Phang Nga football club and their stories. How about we take a step forward because of the lighting issue? Now Mr. Bass is showing us the photos in his cell phone. Those photos are mostly about the original football field, and we could see those different sizes of wood blocks piecing together to form such a football field. And mostly speaking, those wood blocks also need to be combined with many metal structures, and together they could guarantee the floating of this football pitch. And also they use some nails to bind those structure and wood blocks together. There are also some oil tanks underneath the wood panels in order to highlight the football pitch's buoyancy. And this is the original model of this football pitch. If you have watched the film about the floating football pitch, you might remember that in the beginning those wood blocks make up most of those football pitch, and then they added some plastic rug onto this wood structure. This is also the original look of this pitch. It doesn't look quite bad. It's just it looks quite dangerous to play football on them because of so many exposed nails. And Mr. Bass is now introducing to us about some of their friendship matches with Malaysian team. And those are the members of Phang Nga football team. They represent this village to attend the football matches in other places. On the left side of this photo, that man is who we have interviewed, the biggest son of Mr. Bass. Under the influence of Mr. Bass, he was greatly in love with football matches, so since his childhood, he has represented his village to attend many football games. The reason why this floating football pitch and this football club of Phang Nga is quite popular maybe is because in the early days, this football club has attended many famous matches, and also in this village, all of the players are quite limited by the local conditions. It was beyond the imagination of many other villagers and players that they can manage to play football and practice football on such a floating pitch. And usually in these previous games, they got very good results. The best result was achieved in 2004 and 2010. During those years, for 7 consecutive years, they have won big awards. And Mr. Baz is showing us more photos about those sessions. See, this is one of the photos about the youngsters' football match they have won during the 7 consecutive years from 2004 till 2010. And those are the medals. So those results are really hard won by those players because they, after all, practiced football under such tough situations. Now they have over 10 members, and they're not the strongest football team in Thailand. But if we look at the reputation, then Phang Nga Football Club would be the most famous in southern Thailand. And here in this photo, we could see some of the original members of the football club, like Mr. Bass. They have never left this village. Instead, they remain here and trained many more generations of Phang Nga youngsters to play football. So such stories are usually becoming major subjects of word of mouth of local Thailand villagers. And many Thailand organizations become aware of this village and its floating pitch. That's why more people are willing to offer more financial support to this locality. Next, Mr. Bass is gonna take us to the only school on this island for more touring. I have to say that this floating football pitch is usually used for their daily training, but for the major training sessions, it was usually staged in another football stadium on this island. As I said, many organizations are offering support to this village. In addition to help them build and renovate such a football pitch floating on the ocean, they are also helping the villagers to build an overland football pitch. Mr. Bass was just now introducing that after the overnight fame earned by this Phang Nga village, we have been more welcomed by the tourists. So an increasing number of tourists are coming and visiting this island. And of course, with the tourism in a boom, many local villagers have transitioned from the former fishing industry to tourism industry, or they may choose to open some souvenir shops. You could see all of these souvenirs. They are made manually by the local villagers for sale. For example, this one is made of the coconut shells. It's quite delicate and it's very popular among the visitors. How about we interview the peddler?
才他也给我们介绍到了，就是之前呢，这个岛上的这些旅游商品并不多，而随着游客的增多呢，他们现在越来越多的这种旅游商品开始出现，并且海底卖咖啡，并且卖的也还挺好的。那空调已经卖。
According to the shop owner, in the beginning, the island does not produce so many souvenirs, but with the rising number of tourists, they produced many more souvenirs for sales, and usually they're quite welcomed by the tourists. And she told us that they're receiving more and more tourists and they're earning more. Now let's keep walking and tour around this island. As I said, there is no flat land on this island. And for the roads, they are also built above the water. Let's take this way. You could see that all of the roads and houses are built high above the water. In the morning, when we came here, this place is just a sand area, but now because of the tide, it is now surrounded by water. And for the shops, they are also burgeoning. That explains the rising number of tourists. With so many tourists, are they helping to improve the local villagers' livelihood? And Mr. Bat said that these tourists did increase the income of local villagers, but still, the local villagers are keeping many customs, for example, building the houses above the water and relying on ships for transportation. Here we see many specialties on the island for sale. Using the local seafood, garlic, and the crabs, they're cooking all of those materials into this food for sale. And this is a shrimp sauce. She's taking this food for me to have a taste. It's quite chilly, traditional Thailand food taste. This is the shrimps, the dried fish. Here they are selling some clothes. Those clothes are quite popular among the tourists because they are of local feature. And here are some ornaments made of pearls. Those pearls are actually acquired from the surrounding village, and they process those pearls here. This morning when I was here, I also met a lot of tourists. But this island is not taking tourism as a pillar industry because this place has limited land and many villagers. So this place cannot accommodate very well-developed accommodation facilities or other tourism facilities. Usually the tourists are just having a short time stay here on the island and they're going to rest overnight in the other islands in the surroundings. Now at 5 o'clock at local time, we could see very few tourists remaining on this Phang Nga island. And now we are here in the only school on the Phang Nga island. It includes primary school and secondary school education. As I said, in this school, they built a new football field because many social organizations in Thailand are offering financial support to build such an overland football pitch. And now the kids are still playing football. An old man was just now kicking off this ball. And according to Mr. Bass, this football team was composed of the original members of the Phang Nga Football Club. And of course, they are replenished by many young generations. That old man over there, he was the founding members of the Phang Nga Football Club, just like Mr. Bass. And after these founding members, they have about 5 sessions of the football club. So for those years, they have cultivated about 200 football players. Consider only 1,600 population on the island. That was quite a big number. You could imagine that in such an excluded small fishing island, football is very beloved by the local villagers. Mr. Bass was telling me an interesting story because he was born in this village and he received his education in this school. So when he was young, all of the kids were very naughty. And you could see the roofs of those houses. The houses have been restored because while they are practicing football in the playground, they may kick the ball onto the top of the roof and actually damage the roof of those classrooms. He said this place has witnessed a lot of his beautiful memories, including the floating football pitch. Every time he paid his visit back to those pitches, they are reminiscent of his younger memories. I just now asked another question. There are 2 new football fields on this island, newly built, including an outdoor one and this floating football pitch. Has he considered about whether the original floating football pitch would be abandoned? But Mr. Bass said that the floating football pitch was the first pitch to witness their football dream, so he hopes to keep maintaining such a floating football pitch in order for it to be maintained. And also with that floating pitch intact, all of those younger generations in this island could remember the dream of football. and also remember how those younger generations of Panyee have loved the football. Now we are seeing some other reporters from the other media groups to do interview because of the fame of this Panyee Island. Today we have taken you to learn something about the floating football pitch on Panyee Island, and also we have informed our viewers about the football team, the football club, and their stories behind those photos. And we have also interviewed Mr. Bass, the founding member of the football club. And Mr. Bass said that he hopes to keep maintaining the floating football pitch in order to live their dreams for generations to come. Now it's the World Cup time. I hope that